Before we begin our journey on this quiet night, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. It's always delightful to discover where our listeners lay their heads as they travel with us through these ancient memories. Now, close your eyes if you wish. Make yourself as comfortable as possible. Feel the weight of the blankets, the softness of the pillow, and let your mind rest. Tonight, we're going back in time to a place where the sound of bells could mean a church service or the plague, where diagnoses came through scent and relief was often just a vague promise. Welcome to the world of medieval medicine, a practice wrapped in faith, trial and error, and a touch of superstition. But before we speak of great names and strange mysteries, imagine yourself there, not as a noble or a patient, but as someone just starting out. A day as a surgeon's apprentice in London, blood, leeches and urine as diagnosis. Imagine waking up to a grey morning in 14th century London. The air is heavy, not with smoke, but with dampness and the smell of wet wood. You sit up on a small bed of braided straw, listening to the distant rumble of cartwheels, the steady rhythm of horses' hooves, and the most persistent sound of all, coughing. Deep, drawn-out coughs, echoing from every corner like a background hum of the city. You are the apprentice of a local surgeon, not exactly a physician, but someone who, with courage and little formal training, tends to the bodies of the living, and with luck, keeps a few alive a little longer. The day begins early. The sun has yet to warm the cobbled streets, and already there's a line outside the small tent where you and your master receive patients. People wait, covering their faces with cloth, or holding out small flasks with samples to be examined. Before seeing anyone, your master teaches you to smell, yes, smell, urine. According to the medical wisdom of the time, both color and scent reveal much. A strong yellow might signal excess bile, a sweet smell, perhaps an imbalance of cold humors. You write it down with a feather quill in a stained notebook. Amber-colored urine, possible melancholic imbalance. Beside you, your master prepares a small vial of blood to examine under the window light. He speaks softly, always patient. Watch the bubbles, boy. See how they rise. That may be a sign of inner heat. You don't fully understand, but you write it down. Learning here means listening and repeating. As the day progresses, the more complicated cases arrive. Infected wounds, poorly healed fractures, tumors no one can name, only cut. You hold the tools, still damp from an incomplete cleaning. The forceps, the curved blades, the linen ligatures. The master makes quick incisions, often without even cleaning the site. There's no anesthesia, only prayers. The patient screams, then faints. From pain or fear, it doesn't matter. The procedure continues. By midday, the tent smells of vinegar, sweat, and dried blood. You step outside to fetch more leeches. They're kept in clay pots and applied gently to the inflamed skin of certain patients. Some say they help balance the humors, others simply accept them because there is no alternative. In the afternoon, travelers begin to arrive. A farmer who fell from his horse, a child with persistent fever, an old woman with purplish feet. The master gives short diagnoses based on his experience and the same doctrines he heard in his youth. Aristotle, Galen, Hippocrates. Medicine changes little, the world even less. And you learn. You write, observe, clean, hold, obey. At the end of the day, once the last patient leaves, the master washes his hands in a bucket of murky water. You watch him. He looks tired but steady. He carefully stores the instruments, covers the jars with cloth, and lights a candle. "We'll know tomorrow who survived," he says. And you simply nod. Back on your straw bed, the coughing still drifts in from outside. But inside the small room, there is silence. A silence of exhaustion, of routine, and of a strange sense of purpose. Tomorrow will be the same. And if you're lucky, you'll learn to hold the scalpel without trembling. Guy de Chauliac, the surgeon who survived the plague with wisdom and luck. Now imagine that time has passed. Decades have gone by since that London apprentice, and the scene changes. Europe now faces a new challenge, a silent, shadowy, invisible visitor, the plague. But amid the chaos, there is one figure who watches, records, writes. His name is Guy de Chauliac, a man who, with quill and scalpel, helped shape the future of medicine while surrounded by death. Guy was born around the year 1300 in a small village in France called Chauliac. Of peasant origin, he was not a nobleman nor the son of physicians. He was simply a young man with curiosity, discipline, and a deep faith in the power of knowledge. From an early age, he fell in love with books. He studied medicine in Toulouse, then Montpellier, and later in Bologna. Names like Galen and Hippocrates filled his notebooks. But Guy was not content with repetition. He wanted to see with his own eyes. He wanted to understand how the body worked, not from ancient treatises, but from the cold tables of real hospitals. He became a surgeon, but unlike many others, he was also a priest. This dual role placed him in a rare position, between the blade and the prayer, between the body and the soul. He believed that healing required science, but also compassion. He was appointed physician to the Pope in Avignon, one of the church's most important centers at the time. But what defined his life came in 1348, when the Black Death struck the city. At that time, the plague was seen as divine punishment. People died in a matter of days. Bodies were left in the streets. Families no longer touched each other. Fear hung thick in the air, just like the smoke of herbs burning inside homes. Guy could have fled. Many did. Others simply vanished. But he stayed. For weeks, he treated patients, recorded symptoms, watched the patterns unfold. He noticed that contagion came through contact, through clothing, through the air. And even without understanding the bacteria behind the disease, he proposed isolation, wound cleaning, and protection. He used vinegar, made incisions, applied poultices with limited resources and steady hands. At the height of the plague, he became infected. He went into isolation. His fever rose, the buboes appeared. But he survived. Through luck, through strength, through some mystery he himself could never explain. After recovering, he returned to work. And later, he wrote his most famous work, Chirurgia Magna, a treatise that would be read for centuries. In it, Guy detailed procedures, clinical observations, and reflections on the physician's role. And perhaps most importantly, he taught that observing the patient is worth more than reciting old texts. Guy lived to the age of 80, an extraordinary feat for his time. When we read his writings today, we notice something remarkable. He was not just a technician, he was a chronicler of human suffering. He described despair, courage, and resignation with the serenity of someone who had seen too much and yet never lost faith in his craft. Imagine Guy de Chauliac at the end of a long day, sitting in his simple cell, a candle flickering beside him, writing calmly about the wounds he saw, the hands he held, the bodies he cleaned. There is no rush, no glory, only the quiet commitment to leave something better for those who come after. The lost Arabic medical manuscripts. What did Avicenna know that was forgotten? Now imagine yourself in a different landscape. No longer the damp alleyways of London, nor the dark corridors of the European plague, but beneath the vast desert sky, where the stars shine with clarity, and the silence of the night is broken only by the soft rustle of ancient parchment pages. We are in the heart of the medieval Islamic world, a time when science blossomed in languages other than Latin, and medicine was as much an art as it was a philosophy. There, one name echoed through the libraries and schools of Baghdad, Cordoba, Bukhara and Cairo, Avicenna, or, as he was known in his homeland, Ibn Sina. The son of a Samanid Empire official, Avicenna was born in the year 980 in what is now Uzbekistan. He was a prodigy. It is said that by the age of 16 he was already practicing medicine. By 21 he had written works that would still be read centuries later. And by 30 he was regarded as one of the greatest physicians, philosophers, and scholars of his time. But it is not only his life that draws our attention tonight. It is what he wrote, and what was, in part, lost. His most famous work was the Canon of Medicine, Al-Qanun fi al-Tib in Arabic, a vast compendium that organized, described, and analyzed hundreds of diseases, treatments, and diagnostic methods. And curiously, it was profoundly methodical, observational, and logical. Avicenna believed the body held a subtle balance, and that treating illness required more than medicine. One had to understand the patient as a whole. He studied heartbeats, bodily humors, digestion, pulse rhythms, and even dreams. He described meningitis, spoke of contagious diseases, and strongly advocated for hygiene. His knowledge influenced the West so deeply that for centuries, European universities used the canon as a core reference, even in places like Paris, Oxford, and Bologna. But there is something still shrouded in mist. Avicenna wrote much more than what has survived. Copies were lost to fires, invasions, and neglect. Others were preserved only in part, scattered across Middle Eastern libraries or forgotten in private collections. Some scholars suggest that he described, in remarkable detail, procedures for eye surgery, psychiatric disorders, and even herbal treatments that are only now being rediscovered by modern pharmacology. And there's more: private letters, philosophical commentaries on the soul and the body, and even medical treatises he is said to have destroyed for being incomplete or dangerous if misused. Imagine for a moment a small stone library near Isfahan. There, on narrow shelves, rest ancient scrolls covered in dust, unopened for centuries, each one a piece of the puzzle of human knowledge. Some modern researchers still dream of finding those manuscripts, but many perhaps will never be read again, lost to the pathways of time, to wars, to regimes that dismissed knowledge. Even so, echoes of what was written still remain. When a doctor today checks a patient's pulse, observes their urine, or asks about daily habits, they are unknowingly repeating the gestures of Avicenna. His ideas crossed civilizations and still whisper in quiet clinics, in gentle voices and thoughtful diagnoses. We do not know exactly all that he knew, but we know enough to recognize that there, under candlelight in the desert, surrounded by cushions, scrolls, and glass jars, there once existed a medicine of profound wisdom, calm, dedicated, made to heal and to understand. Court physicians, between banquets and magical remedies, the luxury of private medicine. Now imagine yourself entering a palace. There's no hurry. You walk along long, carpeted hallways where tapestries hang from the walls like curtains of history. The air carries the scent of cinnamon, incense, and something else harder to name, perhaps time. This is where the court physician resides. Unlike his colleagues tending to the sick in city streets or war-torn fields, this physician does not work among crowds. His patients are few, but each one is worth a kingdom. In England, France, the Holy Roman Empire, Castile, or the Ottoman court, nearly every royal court had its own physician, and with them, their own rules. The court physician was often a foreigner, chosen not only for his skill, but for his discretion, loyalty, and for what he could offer without drawing attention. He rose early, even before the king awoke. He would approach the royal chambers with care, announcing himself with a silent bow. Medicine here was a matter of etiquette, almost a dance. His instrument case was made of ivory or polished wood. The bottles bore inscriptions in Arabic, Hebrew, or Latin. Each herb, carefully stored in linen pouches, came from distant lands. Myrrh from the east, lavender from Provence, musk from North Africa. The consultation began with soft-spoken questions. How did your Majesty sleep? Did you notice any irregularity in your pulse this morning? May I observe your eyes under the sunlight? But court medicine went beyond the physical. It involved temperament, humours and symbolism. Too much melancholy? Perhaps a warmer diet with spiced wine. Frequent colic? A warm pouch with a petal infusion. Often physicians prepared curious remedies, pills made with crushed pearl, poultices of amber, syrups with rose petals and honey. Some worked, others simply pleased the palate and the ego. Yet these physicians walked a delicate line. If the king's condition worsened, the blame might fall on them. And if he improved, perhaps it was simply faith. In the more superstitious courts, physicians also served as astrologers. They consulted the stars before prescribing a laxative. Skipping a day of bloodletting because Saturn was poorly aligned was not unusual. In the French court, doctors competed with alchemists and apothecaries. In England, they rivaled Protestant healers and Catholic priests. In the Byzantine Empire, they balanced science with theological doctrine. And in the Islamic caliphates, some court physicians came from the schools of Baghdad, fluent in many languages and versed in both Greek medicine and Eastern wisdom. The luxury of their daily life contrasted with the harshness outside palace walls. But fear, that was the same. For one mistake could cost not only a patient, but a head. Now picture that physician, alone at the end of the day, in his quiet chamber. He removes his rings, stores the herbs he used, and writes in his journal in tiny script. Perhaps he mourns that the princess did not improve, or that the duke refused the elixir. Perhaps he secretly longs to return to the anonymity of a village, where patients wore no crowns and diagnoses did not require diplomacy. But tomorrow he will be there once more. With his case in hand, his voice soft, and the quiet certainty that even among tapestries and gold, the human body remains a mystery. And so, on this quiet night, we have wandered through the dimly lit corridors of medieval medicine. We saw the apprentice sweating before a dull scalpel, the surgeon who chose to stay in the midst of the plague, the scrolls that whisper ancient secrets, even if they can no longer be read, and the gilded halls where healing was an act of theatre, diplomacy, and faith. In all these places, one silent truth repeats itself: the fragility of life and the persistence of those who strive to understand it. Tonight, as you lie in your comfortable bed, with clean blankets and the gentle promise of tomorrow, think of how distant, and yet how close, that world truly is. Back then there were no antibiotics, no stethoscopes, but there were watchful eyes, careful hands, and an unwavering will to ease suffering. Medieval medicine may seem at first glance a tangle of errors, but at its heart, it was built on effort, on learning, and on hope. Perhaps it is that very hope that carries time forward, the belief that even without knowing everything, we can still care for one another. Now let those images slowly fade. Let the ancient names rest in silence. Let the candles go out one by one, and the sound of turning pages vanish into the wind. You are safe. You are here. And as the echoes of the past dissolve into the night, may sleep come gently, peacefully, like an old balm found between the pages of a forgotten manuscript. Good night, and until the next story.